So I guess the first question is, why should we care about all this stuff? You know, enormous amount of money is being spent, lots of conferences are being held, people are going all around the country saying the sky is falling. Should we really care? Is this really worth all the energy that's being put into it? Some of you may think this, as I look around here and look at the ages, some of you may think this is a new problem. Actually, this has been around for a little bit. It's a famous cartoon that ran in the New Yorker. I won't tell you when, but the basic concept here is on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Now, let me take some guesses on when you think this was public. 1993. Cheater. Yeah, it was recently. Absolutely. It was recently the 15th year anniversary of this being published. Everybody's excited about it, but not the 15th year. It's coming up on the 20th, 22nd, actually. So I think if you try and get, the internet was just being born, and this cartoonist came out and figured it out, that the internet was going to be a problem, and because you could pose and be anything you wanted to be on the internet. I call this the cartoon that launched 1,000 chips. You know, the whole industry then changed after this realization became real. So, because no one knows your dog, you cannot assert your own identity. If you think about Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, and so forth, those are domains where you are effectively saying, I am who I am, trust me. That really doesn't work in environments where you really have to know who the individual is. So the bottom line is, you cannot assert your own identity. Someone has to do it for you. So how do we get there from here? Well, we invented something called credential service providers. And what do credential service providers? They have the role of producing an identity credential that you can use and produce to other people, and theoretically, they will believe that's who you are. So, how easy is that to do, and is it really necessary? So, there's two challenges for a credential service provider when he's trying to do this. And these next three slides are going to appear to be pretty simplistic. I would suggest that you focus on them because there's really an essence in here that most people miss about identity. So, the credential service provider has two challenges. The first challenge is he has to understand or come to a belief you are who you purport to be. So he's going to do something magic, and at the end of all that magic, he'll say, okay, you're who you said you are. And then he has to find a way to communicate his willingness to say you are who you are to other people. Those really are two separate things and need to be understood that way. So let's look at the first one. How do I figure out your identity? Well, let's start from the bottom. I can guess who you are. Are you Chuck Jones? That's a guess, I don't know. I could ask a stranger in the bar, is this Chuck Jones? And if you think about what I'm doing here, I'm going up a continuum, and I end up with cross-generational DNA testing that probably would give me a pretty good fix on who this individual is. So a credential service provider has to figure out your identity, and he has to figure out a process that allows him to do that. What are the two variables in this process? Time, money. Okay? So if he has 2 years to figure it out, he probably could do DNA testing. If he has 30 seconds to figure it out, he probably can't. If he has $1 to figure it out, he probably can't do DNA testing either. So time and money condition how the identity proofing will be done. Okay. Now, at the end of the identity proofing process, he says, okay, this really is Chuck Jones, I buy it. Now, I have to figure out a way to tell all the rest of you, this is Chuck Jones. I have to figure out a way to publish, if you will, my assertion about him. How do we do that? Well, that's Chuck. I can whisper it. I can write you a letter, to whom it may concern. Gentleman holding this letter is Chuck Jones. I can do username and password. Does she have a username and password? When you see it, it's supposed to be Chuck Jones. I can do MFA. I can do embedded chips. All of which, and this is the critically important part, all of which are simply packaging for the assertion I am making. They are not the security. There's security around the packaging, but they are not the identity. The identity is what is effectively asserted inside them. Now, if you look at what you've done in the past, how many have gone to conferences that studied this stuff? You know, we need smart cards, we need MFA, you know, I'll tell you, chips are dead, all that. Conference after conference after conference. How many of you have been to a conference and studied this stuff? Virtually no, except it's really an insider's game. But this is the essence of identity. How you get it right. How you package it is a pure technology game. It's a commodity. Your MFA is your MFA is your MFA is your MFA. Your RSA token, your Vasco token, they're all the same. They essentially don't change the security. The security comes from the quality of the identity. The IRS hack that happened a couple weeks ago, people now believe that they beat the KBA system. They had hacked, and this is a sort of worrisome in that it appears that data captured in other hacks was then used in the IRS KBA system. So this is the first example of I'll go gather information from Anthem, and I'll come over here to the IRS, and I'll input it and see what we can figure out from it. So identity is the challenge, packaging is a commodity, okay? Now, just on the packaging being a commodity, let's not overstate that a little bit. Verizon does a periodic analysis of internet threats and breaches, and I think their 2014 edition indicated that 87% of the breaches they studied included a password breach. 0% included an MFA breach. So usernames and passwords really are dead. You really should be going to MFA. It's not foolproof, but it clearly is a heck of a lot better than passwords. Okay, so if we take these two axes, the need to get the identity, the need to figure out how to package it, life becomes then the challenge of figuring out the sweet spot. What is the level of time and money I can spend on identity? What is the level of time and money I can spend on the packaging to get to what is, in some people's mind, coming to be the standard for identity credentials, the NIST LOA3 credential. Okay? By the way, you can ask questions all along here if you want to. I don't need to wait to the end to have it. Yeah. Knowledge-based authentication. Okay? So given this is what identity is all about, who you are and how I package it, and how I present it to the world. Now let's talk about Health IDX, and let me give you a little bit of the background on this. We have come to believe that at the end of the day, people need fewer rather than more credentials. We believe that providers in the healthcare industry should be able to log on to their EHR, log on to their e-prescribing for controlled substances, log on to their state PDMP program, log on to Hippocrates, log on to New England Journal of Medicine, effectively using the same credential. You know, they shouldn't have to have 10 credentials to do all of that. So Health IDX is about fewer credentials, more places they can be used. So what do? We do for identity what Visa does for payments. Now, who knows what Visa does for payments? Same two guys all the time. There's always people who ruin your presentations. Anyway, what Visa does, it enables spontaneous payment transactions between strangers. Ivan can get on a plane in Uzbekistan, he can fly to Fort Lauderdale, he can walk in a t-shirt shop, he can buy $500 worth of t-shirts from Jose and walk out the door. They don't have a clue who each other are. Never heard of each other before, we'll never hear of each other again, but they did a deal. They did a deal because Ivan could present a credit card. Okay? Think about identity. The same thing has to happen on the internet for identities. You have to find a way that total strangers can spontaneously communicate with each other and, more importantly, collaborate in healthcare. So let's look at how you get there from here. How do you get the ability for spontaneous communications on the internet? So, I'll give you another credit card analogy, and we'll weave this through here on a number of different ways. So, when you go home, you say, what did that guy say about credit cards again? Anyway, in the beginning, many years ago, there was only one credit card. It was the Bank of America credit card. And all banks who issued credit cards were effectively franchisees of the Bank of America. Now, as you might expect, nothing's forever. The last Bank of Boise, Idaho said, this is nuts. We're important people. We're going to issue our own credit card. So what did they do? Last Bank of Boise, Idaho. They had a rich potato farmer there. He wanted to be the first in town to have a card, got that card, jumped in his Cadillac, drove to Miami, went into the Breakers Hotel and said, I'm here. I want the best suite you have. What did the Breakers say? We never heard of you. We never heard of the last Bank of Boise, Idaho. I'm sorry, sir. There's the door. So what had to happen before the last Bank of Boise, Idaho's credit card was good at the Breakers Hotel actually in Palm Beach, not Miami Beach, in Palm Beach, Florida? It had to have Visa on the front. Okay? And what did Visa on the front stand for? Stood for two things, or three things, two things. Stood for one, a technical infrastructure. You swipe the card, the music goes round and round, and comes out here. Okay? So swipe it at the Breakers, swipe it at a restaurant, swipe it at Joe Banks, swipe it at wherever, it works. So Visa established a technical standard. The second and more important thing that Visa did, it stood for a contract infrastructure that all the players to the transaction agreed upon. The merchant, the t-shirt shop, when they signed up to accept Visa, they said, we'll play by the rules. Last Bank of Boise, Idaho, when they agreed to issue Visa cards, said, we'll play by the rules. And the potato farmer, when he signed his credit card agreement, said, I'll play by the rules. So now we had a technical infrastructure and a contract infrastructure, and we had in place the essence of what was necessary to create the credit card system. So it will be with healthcare. The last, what do I call them? The last medical group practice of New Milford, Connecticut, 22 docs, really great people. Everybody in the community loves them. They can all log onto their EHR system. Works like magic. That credential will never, ever be able to go anywhere else. Because who on earth has heard of the last group practice of New Milford, Connecticut? So just like the last Bank of Boise, Idaho needed Visa on the front for its bank card to be accepted anywhere, healthcare organizations will need some sort of a trust mark around their identity credentials that accomplish the same thing, if you will, that the Visa accomplishes. I don't know who the last group practice of New Milford is, but I do know who Health IDX is. Okay, so it's this trust mark that will make things work. So why is this important? Healthcare is a team sport. It's changing every day. You see new technology announced, new capabilities announced, new sources of data being made available. So high quality, patient-centered care, and this along the continuum of care are becoming everyone's goal. This continuum care oftentimes includes people who are effectively strangers to each other. He's getting out today, he needs to go to a SNF. Does anybody know the doctor at the SNF? Call him up on the phone, send him a fax. And it's a grossly inefficient system, And much of the reason for that is that people cannot communicate with strangers on a spontaneous basis. So what identity, again, is going to do is enable that and make it happen. So this, if you see at the bottom here, trusted identity and secure communication channels end up being the cornerstones of this type of communication. So, Health IDX, what is the value proposition? What we effectively do, and top is PR, bottom's the reality, we aggregate technology, data, policy, procedures, certifications. All of these things taken together create the basket of things necessary to issue a trusted credential that, in theory, other people should be able to rely on. So the value added, the value proposition to an organization is they can do all these by themselves. But again, I go back to the last group of New Milford, Connecticut. They can do some of this, but at the end of the day, no one will care. So this is a situation where you have to do something across a broad group of people to make this have meaning. How do we do it? It's magic. We do two things. So again, as I spoke earlier, the goal here is to be able to, for providers, and ultimately we'll talk patients, to be able to log on using Health IDX. By the way, if you think about the credit card industry, the early days there were two challenges in the credit card. If you were Visa, your two big problems were the following: getting banks to issue the cards, getting merchants to accept the cards. If 10 million banks issued the cards, but no merchants accepted them, you had nothing. If 10 million merchants accepted them, but there were no cards out there, you had nothing. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem in all of this. But as that gets solved, what then happens? In not the early days, but the medium days of the credit card industry, you may remember Visa used to compete with American Express by saying, Visa, we're everywhere you want to be. That was a direct slap at American Express in the fact that more organizations accepted Visa cards than accept American Express cards. So in an identity system that we create, log on with Health IDX, the critical importance becomes who accepts it. And what are the credentials that, or what are the elements that would allow people to say, I will accept this? Well, there's something out there called FiCAM, Federal Identity Credential and Access Management standard that the US government has put out. So if you want to issue credentials, you might want to be certified to be able to issue a FiCAM credential. Number two, NIST has published a document, I think it was first came out in 2002-ish, revised in 2013-ish, called 863. And in that, the notions of level of assurance got created. And a level of assurance relates to the relative certainty I have in the quality of the credential. A level 1 credential is a self-assertion. Hi, I'm Scott Lowry. Nobody else is getting involved in that. I'm Scott Lowry. So level 1, what's my relative level of what would be your relative level of assurance? Not so sure. Level 2 is I'm Scott Lowry, and by the way, I showed a utility bill. Level 3 is I'm Scott Lowry, I showed a utility bill, I did a KBA analysis of me, and so you're pretty sure you are who you purport to be. So the genesis of all that was this NIST document 863. It's available online, and you probably should take a look at it. And then finally, HIMSS has a patient authentication working group that wrapped up sort of the first wave of its efforts about a month ago, and they concluded from that work that patients should have a LOA 3 credential to access personal health records. Okay? How do people use it? So, Eureka, I've got a credential, what am I going to do? Okay? Well, let's look at providers. We think the provider credential is in the middle of this constellation. He can use it for clinical research, collaborative web services, direct secure messaging, enter his enterprise network, EHR, PHR, HIE, e-prescribing for controlled substances, PDMP program. So there's a multitude of applications that would be available to a provider with this type of credential. Okay, what about the patient? Well, the patient is going to be able to grant consent and authorization. He's going to be able to access his PHR, able to do a personal health cloud at the bottom. You'll note this. What we believe is going to happen is that individuals will have a PHR, which is the anchor of their medical activities on the web, and then they will pick 4 to 6 other applications that they like to go to too. We feel that they would normally have to be authenticated into. We're going to create a single sign-on environment that would allow them to do all of that with one. I've been given the speed up by Brian, so we'll go through this quickly. So what does it all look like? In theory, one would show up at a website of a healthcare organization and look on the right side, you would see, if you all have been there before and have a long-standing account, you'd say, log in with your username or password or whatever credential you have. If you don't have one there, you would see on the left side, pick a credential provider. Yeah, okay. What do you want to do, Brian? Oh, okay. I guess I misunderstood. This is what one would look like. We'd have the identity broker in the middle. You would have identity providers on top, credential providers. This is a federation discussion. Credential providers on top, potential relying parties on the bottom. Identity providers would be certified by a trust framework, and RPs would get to define what level of assurance they wanted to accept. Yeah, this is about us. And yeah, we're probably done. By the time it's obvious, I'll just finish up with one important point here. I say, by the time it's obvious, it'll be too late. Generally speaking, in most industries, there are 2 times that you get a chance to really do it right. The first is when the industry is in its infancy, and it's not clear what people are going to do. You know, let's do this, no, let's do that, no, let's do this. And if you don't get agreement at that point in time, the industry fragments and goes in a lot of different directions. 20 years later, after everybody gets tired, they say, you know, why don't we roll this up and all do it one way? So we're at a point now where we have a chance to do this right. We probably have that chance for about another year. If we don't do this in another year, this will go in a lot of different directions, and it will be some time before we can do it by then. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have time for any questions, Brian?
Let's hold the questions till after the next one we have online, or we'll catch up at lunch. All right.
Great, thank you.